Well, Congressman Hern, thank you so much for being with us today.
It's great to be with you.
Before we jump into all things immigration, I want to take just a moment to introduce you to our audience. I think a lot of our members will know you, but not everyone. So let me just say that Congressman Kevin Hern is beginning his fourth term in Congress, and he represents Oklahoma's 1st district. And as being a Midwesterner, we're not too far in Iowa, but that is an area in northeast Oklahoma, and it encompasses, I think, a lot of the Tulsa area. Is that right?
All Tulsa. It's really probably one of the smallest districts, geography-wise, in the nation now for Republicans.
Oh, yeah.
So we're fighting the increasingly blue wave coming into getting a little purplish. So we have to keep fighting hard, but it doesn't change our conservative policy.
Okay. And a congressman is also very familiar with policy and immigration policy in particular, as he's currently serving as the House Republican Policy Committee chairman. So we're very excited to have you today. We know that you've got a great history. You've been fighting for common sense immigration policies, and we're just eager to talk to you about all sorts of things that are going to happen on Capitol Hill coming up. So let's start with this week's news. The big news was President Trump's first day in office and his executive orders. And for some of our listeners who may not have kept track of them all, he declared a national emergency on the border. He restarted border wall construction. He reinstated the very popular and proven successful Remain in Mexico program. He ended these broad categorical parole programs like CHNV. And he invoked both constitutional and statutory authorities to suspend entry of illegal aliens at the southern border. So all of this flurry of activity, and Congress is now back in for a new session. You've got lots of new people. You've got lots of returning people, and Republicans are still in the majority. What can you do to support these efforts?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. This is such an important issue. It's interesting. I was on a different interview earlier this morning, and their narrative is Congressman, why did the president do all this stuff? And immigration or illegal immigration is down so much because Joe Biden implemented all these great policies earlier. And I said, yes, what he did is he reinstated President Trump's policies. After he had allowed 10 million, at least 10 million people in, and many, many known terrorists. And so what we know is, as you mentioned, the Remain in Mexico, or MPP, is so important. Right now we've got a whole caravan of folks that were started this way, and what we want that to happen is to not even start. Right, go to your embassies, your consulates in those countries. Plead your case for asylum under the 5 criteria that exist, and stay in your country. It's much safer than traversing across Mexico with the cartels. But now I think Mexico's agreed to some 70,000 people to be, allowed to be staying on the southern side of the border while they're going through their asylum process. As that becomes more viewed by people from all over the world, as it did before, less people will come to the border. And in the conversation with Chad Wolf during my last 2 years as chair of the RSC, the Republican Study Committee, Chad said, I'd love to have an MPP in about 5 different countries. And so that work would say, you'd stay there in, Yemen, or you'd stay somewhere in the Middle East before you traversed across the globe to come to Mexico illegally and come in this country illegally. So a lot of great things are happening. We saw the president sent 1,500 members of the military to, do coordination of building the wall, and have air support to move people around quickly to get things done. But a new sheriff's in town, and we're seeing, law and order restored at the southern border. And I would argue probably one of the most bipartisan things we've seen in the last few weeks has been Democrats supporting border policies without any conditions, by the way. The Lake and Riley Act is the latest.
Yeah, that's really exciting. And actually, this is a first, I think the Lake and Riley Act, I think probably all of our members know that this was, Lake and Riley was the nursing student in Georgia who was brutally murdered by an illegal alien from Venezuela who was had a rap sheet, was caught in New York, and then came down and also had shoplifting offenses and things of that sort before he decided tragically to attack Lake and Riley. And this legislation just passed last night, wasn't it?
Mhm.
And we saw more Democrats on that an immigration enforcement bill than we've seen in a very, very long time. But the Lake and Riley Act is just one of several that House Republicans are looking to move through Congress. So what can we expect to see there?
Yeah, so 2 years ago, obviously, we passed H.R. 2, which was our
Mhm.
second most important bill behind energy dominance around the world. We sent that to the Senate, and Chuck Schumer allowed it to die in the Senate. So we had, we're reconstituting a lot of those things we can get through, what is known as budget reconciliation. We've heard our new border czar, Tom Homan, talking about that he needs more detention beds as he transfers the custody of these certain felons, illegal felons across the nation, as he takes them out of their jails and takes possession of those felons into custody. ICE, he needs a place to put them. So we need to go from 20 to 30,000 beds to probably 100,000 beds as we transition so they can be deported out of the country back to places around the world, not just Mexico. And so that's one big area. We need to make sure we have border funding. The president before he moved and transferred funds before, as it was stalled out under Nancy Pelosi. We moved funds over from defense. He doesn't want to do that. Defense is very important. We have a lot of issues around the world that we need to make sure we're defending the freedoms of our friends and allies as well as ourselves. And so we want to have funding for that. So I think that's really the two biggest areas. Making sure we have the ICE agents we need to go around and apprehend and take into custody these people that are already in jail. And we're going to do everything we can in a very short period of time to make sure he has that money.
Yeah, it's interesting. I noticed that it was announced, I think just yesterday, that the president is now giving immigration enforcement authorities to other federal agents like ATF agents and DEA agents. And it's a really interesting way to try and fill the gap until, because, hiring a lot, I mean, we're talking about a significant amount of ICE agents. It always takes time, you got to get the money, but then you also have to hire, recruit, and train. So it's a fascinating way to jumpstart these efforts. So we're, really excited about some of these. He's not just waiting for it to take place while things continue to, deteriorate at the border. He's getting right in there.
It's much like a cross-deputization type environment where, as you say, other federal agencies have the ability to detain someone to be able to hand them off where they may not have had that authority before. Not necessarily go do raids or things like that, but in their normal course of work, as ATF is doing, and they run across somebody like that, they now have a direct contact, a hotline, if you will, to be able to call ICE to come pick them up, or HSI.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So you mentioned reconciliation and money for detention beds and things of that sort. I was wondering maybe if you could explain a little bit about the reconciliation process, just for our members who may not have heard about it before, and then maybe give some examples of what you'd like to see in immigration go through on reconciliation.
Well, everybody is familiar with your household, do a budget, say, well, this is where I'm going to spend money, then go spend the money. And that's no different than the federal government. We just have a lot more zeros on our income statement. But, Congress back in 1974 were pretty smart, knowing that there were always going to be opportunities of log jams, but we still need to fund the government. So they created this reconciliation process. And it really is a Senate maneuver to get around the 60-vote filibuster rule. That's not a House rule. We're always a simple majority. So it relegates the budgeting process, as long as you can't move policy through reconciliation, but you can remove things through that have a budget impact, like spending, revenue generators, or the debt limit. And so that has to go through the Senate parliamentarians' purview, watchful eye to make sure there's not anything like gun laws or things like that. This was tried with border policy before, and it was, the Senate parliamentarian at that time said, there's no budget impact here, so therefore we're not going to allow, some of the things on the border. We believe there are, the way we're writing the bill, opportunities to bring border in, expand energy policy so that we can replace the energy needs of our allies around the world, where they may be buying energy from Russia or Iran, and we can supply our clean burning energy and allow our tax revenues to continue to grow, which helps offset the issues of inflation. And we're moving forward. But the bigger thing in all of this is the tax package that we're moving, and it impacts every single small business and every single American. If it should expire, it would be the largest tax increase in American history. and all of that would be under Republican watch. So it needs to be passed. And along with passing that, we'll work on spending cuts, and it will end up being the largest spending cut in American history, well over $1 trillion of spending cut over the next 10 years. So the real bright line between passing or not passing, if we let it expire, meaning the tax package, largest tax increase in American history, and no spending cuts. If we pass it, the extra $2,000 to $3,000 per year in American people's pocket will stay there. They can spend it however they want. And we also get spending cuts for the first time, which will be the largest in American history.
Well, we have a few ideas about spending cuts. And I was wondering if you think that maybe, perhaps even in reconciliation, we might be able to see things like denying benefits to illegal aliens. You know, right now you can be, well, I'm simplifying a little bit, but you can be an illegal alien and still qualify for Obamacare. And a lot of people don't realize that. And there are lots of loopholes in our benefits programs, earned income tax credit or additional child tax credit, things of these sort. And we can save lots of money that can be better used for border wall or ICE agents or things of that sort to restore law and order to our system. Do you think anything like that, those ideas might have a chance?
Well, when you go back to 2017, obviously 2 years into President Trump, or excuse me, 1 year into President Trump's first presidency, as you started working the process, things were put into the budget process that weren't necessarily used as you described right there. We've learned a lot, and then certainly President Biden expanded that tremendously to have a tremendous impact on the budget. So those are things we can go after. You couple that with the deportation that, some million felons across America that are already in custody, or we know where they're at, having those deported. I mean, think about the impact of that. We have people in jail that we're paying every single day for them to be there. So there are a lot of things now. We're much wiser on how to write these reconciliation packages as it pertains to border, and we're doing that as we speak.
Great. Well, that is good news. Say, one of the things I want to get onto an issue I know that's near and dear to you. And this kind of gets into the criminal alien issue, because we've all heard about the 650,000 criminal aliens, roughly speaking, that are in the country but are on ICE's docket but are free to roam around, and we want to get the detention beds and we want to deport them, but there's another bigger issue, too, is cartel operations. And one of the first things that President Trump did when he got into office was start the process for state to consider whether, to designate them as foreign terrorist organizations. And, that's a huge deal, but we could be doing more. And you have been working on it's a problem that a lot of people don't know about, that cartels often launder money by sending it home through remittances, or sending it to a country through remittances, either to pay off people or to move money around. And you have introduced legislation on that. I was wondering if you could tell our members about it.
Yeah, so, when you look at, I'm an engineer. I've been in business 40 years, been in Congress for 6 now, and, I'm a problem solver. That's the nature of who I am. And one of the problems, having seen this through the banking world, but certainly in the state of Oklahoma, we address this, and that's, as you described, remittances back to other countries. One of the ways, probably the largest movement of money, comes from cartels interacting with organized crime in the United States. So they'll interact at the border. The cartels don't usually come, knowingly or certainly overtly, where we see them come across the southern border. They're handed off to organized crime syndicates in the United States, which go and pay these and collect the money that these folks are using. These illegals are paying these cartels, and that's how they keep the chain in custody on their money. So they basically finance them to come across. And then the cartels have to wire the money back to Mexico to the cartels, or really bad things happen, like border wars. And so they do it through other countries where maybe it's not really noticeable. But Oklahoma had this issue, and they addressed it through a remittance program. And basically, it's a fee that was charged on every remittance that's sent out of the state to a foreign country. Everybody gets charged that if it's outside of a normal place of business. In other words, banks already are monitored very heavily, so it wouldn't apply to a typical financial institution like that. But some of the other locations that may not be as heavily monitored, that would allow somebody that's without getting personal identification, there would be a known fee associated with that. And this is for simplicity's sake, say it's for $5 for every wire transfer that goes out of the country. That fee could be recollected or given back to you at the end of the year when you file your legal tax return. So if you don't file a legal tax return, that money would go to, in the case of Oklahoma, the state treasury as unclaimed property. It would be used, or in that case, it's actually earmarked for a fund, and it would be used for the general purposes if it's not claimed through a tax return process. Our Wired Act, which I did that at the time with Senator Vance, J.D. Vance, really took a larger look at this, at the overall remittances out of the United States. And it would take those monies and it would actually, to keep it from being consumed by, crazy spending by the Congress in the future, it would tag it directly to a border trust fund so that those monies would go in there to fix the very problem that it's trying to address. So it would be a sort of a circular, self-fulfilling prophecy that the illegal activities of cartels and organized crime would actually do more to help secure the southern border with more ICE agents, more funding for the borders, remove the politics from funding something that's one of the greatest national security issues in our country.
Wow, that's fantastic. And complete common sense too, right? One of the things we talked a lot about at FAIR is how, billions and billions go out to foreign countries and through remittances every year. I think to Mexico alone, I think it's over $60 billion in 2023, and those numbers have probably gone up. And to think that, we could be recapturing some of that money, especially, you have illegal activity just at the low level, economic migrants who come through, but then you have the organized crime, as you were saying, and the cartels, and it makes just a lot of sense to capture that money.
Between declaring them a foreign terrorist organization, the cartels, and starting to restrict the money, there's an old saying, follow the money, we can start tracking where this money's going. There'll be a lot of information on it. And again, for all the legal activity, there's a way this money comes back to you each year. So if you're a normal remitter of money back to your family that may be living in another country, it's certainly legal process to do that. And if you're going to a banking institution, that money wouldn't be taken out anyway, because that's a place where you're normally you're looked at. They know you're positively identifying you as a legal citizen.
Yeah.
So they know who you are. It's the Know Your Customer Act, and so that wouldn't even apply there. So more financial institutions, legal financial institutions, would be having business from wiring, and there would be no fee taken out. This goes to the people who are trying to do this sort of below the covers, if you will.
Seedy sort of way.
Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. Well, getting to more policy issues, I know you were a huge supporter last Congress of H.R. 2, the Secure the Border Act, and that was a broad bill that attacked a whole bunch of issues, really important issues, like really fixing our asylum system and ending all sorts of uses of parole, for example, making very specific limits on when you can release illegal aliens at the southern border, things of that sort. And there's a lot more in it. I couldn't even begin to touch it right now. But that had such broad support in the Republican caucus last year, and actually over in the Senate too. We're really eager to see those policy changes because we cannot let another president, I don't care which party, I don't care who or when, or 10 or 15 or 20 years in the future, abuse our laws as we have witnessed over the last 4 years. We need to get in there and fix laws. There's a role for Congress here. How do you think this policy debate is going to play out? Are we going to see a new and improved version of H.R. 2? Because that was last session, so just for our members, it would have to be reintroduced with a new bill number. When are we going to get movement on that?
Well, I think you're going to see some of that stripped out and put into the reconciliation package. So It won't be the same bill as H.R. 2, the same language. So we'll need to wait and see what components we can strip out.
So you think the portions that can be used in reconciliation? But okay.
So we'll take those parts out, and then we'll have the debate on on the remaining components of that over the once we get beyond the reconciliation process. So I think that's important to note. I think also when you look at, I've been to the border several times, and I'm from California to South Texas at the very southern end, and it's a wild west. And each part of the border it sort of plays out differently based on whether it has a wall or not, or based on what, as the people in Arizona say about Texas. Texas is sort of made for TV because it's daytime, mass crossings, no border wall. You do have the Rio Grande, but that's, as we know, that's very little discouragement unless you're Texas and you've tried to figure out your own ways to do that, in spite of the federal government. But out in Arizona, as an example, the border walls work. And by the way, in my one trip to Tucson, when we crested the hill, there were no border patrol anywhere because we saw 21 miles of wall.
Wow.
And the area sheriff there in Cochise County said, what you're seeing here is 21 miles of wall. The first 19 miles, which shocked all of us, were President Obama's wall. And it's 20 feet tall. President Trump's 30 feet tall. And, we sort of laughed because President Trump says he's going to build a big, big wall. And the reason it was 30 feet tall or 10 feet taller than President Obama is because people were coming over the 20-foot wall and actually jumping over once they got to the top. So they had to find a height that somebody would get there and look and say, that's going to hurt. And so they thought 30 feet was the number. And then what he showed us was on the very western end of President Trump's wall was President Biden's wall. And what President Biden's wall was nothing. And the wall was actually laying on the ground there, goodness. And it's still there. What little he hasn't sold, dated in 2020. So the wall's been there. President Biden could have done something. He could have continued that wall, and we would have had less immigrants. But the immigrants there were not coming in to be caught as they are in Texas. They were coming in they come in military fatigues, backpacks, and disappear into the country. And that's just what's going on at the southern border. And Democrats have seen this. You've seen more mainstream media, the 60 Minutes of the world doing these articles, and people are seeing this now, and they're holding the Democrats accountable. Wow.
Well, I am hopeful that this new Congress, we're seeing, like we were talking about the Laken Riley Act, we're seeing some movement, and hopefully there are a lot of members from both parties who are going to support real common sense immigration reforms. So tell me, I know your time is precious. As we move forward through this, this spring, from now until, Memorial Day, it's going to be pretty crazy. What final thoughts would you like to send to our members and to Americans out there who are watching us today?
Well, President Trump was given a mandate, 312 electoral votes, 77.3 million votes. So he won both. First time Republicans done that in a long time. We had 74 million votes as the collective body of the Republican House, the most in American history. We've been put here for a moment in time, given an opportunity that's highly rare in this place, but we're not given the gift of time. We have a lot to get done. A border policy is so critical to our national security. And keeping with that theme of national security, increasing our defense spending to protect ourselves from bad actors abroad, requires us to get a reconciliation package done on tax to make sure that we've got the ability for American taxpayers to keep money in their own pockets so that they can fight off the history of inflation that we're seeing. It took President Reagan, after the atrocious inflation after President Carter, took him 6 years to get the inflation back to where it was before Carter. We don't have 6 years in this environment. We need to do it quicker than that. So those are all things that are really on our plate, as you just described, before Memorial Day. And, President Trump, I was there on Tuesday with him, his first full day in office. We had the leadership team from the House and the Senate and his leadership team there. And we spent, almost 2 hours in the cabinet room talking about these issues and how important they are and how important we work together. And I can tell you, he is laser focused on the border and protecting the American people, not just Republicans, but every American.
Well, that's good to know. That's great intel. So thank you so much for your time today. It's an honor to have you. I hope you'll come back and update us on all the antics going on in Capitol Hill.
I will. Thank you so much.
Thank you.